Hello, welcome to the panel on Arthurian fiction, to Mallory or not to Mallory. My name's Jeff Campbell. This is my co-editor Shannon Allen. Together, we've just released By the Light of Camelot, which is a short story anthology featuring the Knights of Camelot, the lesser-known knights, so unfamiliar tales. That was sort of our goal. We didn't want to fill it with, you know, that Lancelot fellow again, right? Next to Shannon is Renee Bennett. She's one of our contributors. And next to Renee is our Overwater, but we'll just call him Rick, right?
Please do.
Right. Another of our contributors. So, saw our program description, and it said, on Arthurian fiction, much has been written, much has been said, let's discuss. And yeah, there's an awful lot of Arthurian fiction, reaching way back. Yeah, I think we're going to focus more on the modern fantasy parts of it. Just out of interest, I'd sort of like to ask our panelists, do you recall when you first met King Arthur or the Arthurian tales?
My first introduction to the Arthurian tales was when I was like 8, and it was T.H. White, Once and Future King. So, the unsanitized version of King Arthur.
My first encounter was the sanitized version of T.H. White in the form of Disney's Sword and Stone. I was about 5 or 6 at the time.
I actually have it though, so I was going to say it's probably the Disney thing, but now I remember my parents had a big Childcraft. For those who don't remember these big Childcraft books, and there was a little mini story in one of the books, specifically about the sword and the stone. It was all 5 pages and probably 19-point type or something like that with some illustrations. And I think I remember seeing the Disney story and going, "Oh, that's the sword and stone guy." So a Childcraft story and then Disney. And then that fast forward to my next thing, which would be the Guy Ritchie movie. Now, put it in the heroes. Pretty much that.
Yeah. How many people saw the Guy Ritchie movie? Okay. It was an interesting take.
Go watch Snatch twice and skip that.
You know. Well,
Yeah, don't start me.
yeah, there's never really been outside of comedy, there's never really been a great King Arthur movie.
No.
Right? And it's kind of depressing to look through the lists and see Monty Python and the Holy Grail listed so high, even though it is a great movie, right? And when you're in the Arthurian scholarship chat rooms or something, they all love that movie, right? It got many of the themes right. Oh, the Clive Owen King Arthur? Yeah.
It comes so close in so many aspects, but not quite.
Yeah, yeah.
Your time is wrong. They get the right guys in the wrong time period. They get the wrong guys in the right period of time. And I think that's the problem with a lot of the King Arthur cinema works, is they get it close, but not quite. And like Jeff was saying, Monty Python is probably the best representation of the medieval time period for some section of the Arthurian canon, right? But it's Monty Python, right?
Yeah.
But it's the closest to being historically correct compared to the rest.
What is the historical period of Arthur? I mean, are we talking the post-Roman, or are we talking Lancelot? There actually was in France for Lancelot to come from.
The question of, can I do my rant?
Yes, please do.
We're going there already.
We're gonna do my rant. The span of King Arthur is really hard to pinpoint. You can go right back to the earliest tales of it and ancient texts, one of them being the
Mabinogion.
that one, because I can't pronounce it, which is based on a lot of the oral folklore and tales of the time. And this is around 5th century. Then you move on to people like Mallory and Geoffrey de Monmouth and Christian de Troyes, who brought us Lancelot. But Christian de Troyes is not till the 11th century. So the case of Arthur and his stories is they are a constant retelling and reimagining, and every age has to throw their own thing into it.
Or cut things out.
Or cut things out. I mean, Arthur had a full-blood sister. Do we know that? Merlin had a sister. Do we hear about her? No, we don't. But they were there, and they were part of those early texts. And as you move through history, and then you get into the French Romantic period, which adds courtly love and civilized warfare and all these wonderful things that give the basis to the Victorian era Arthur, who gives us a wide patterning of the acts of chivalry and codes of behavior, which feed into the basis of steampunk. So really, where does Arthur really start and what period he's in? He is multi-generational and therefore timeless. So that is my quick 30-second, 45, whatever it was, rant on the time period of King Arthur. So I think it's reflective of when you find him, and for you, that's your time period. So that's kind of a long-winded answer.
It's there's no official canon. You can't sort of, you know.
Yeah. Like, I guess I'm just wondering that you can say that he's in the wrong time period. You can't say what the right time period is.
Yeah, but they were taking it with the King Arthur movie with Clive Owen.
Yeah.
They were taking a historical bent on it, right? If you're reading through I guess we're a subgenre, right? That sort of straddles fantasy and historical, and books come in and sometimes they're like, wow, I don't care about the history. I want the armor,
Yeah.
right? I want the swords. I want the dragons, the giants, which is fine and good, and that's kind of what we put together here. And then there's the historical Arthur, where they're scaling back the imagination. I mean, the original tales were really imaginative, right? Things like the Bridge of the Sword with Yvain, the knight who went around with his pet lion, right? The questing beast. There's a lot in there, and yeah, things have been layered in, and things have been removed, right? It's part of the fascination of the old tales. Is, well, what were they thinking of here? Why'd they take this? How come this one made the cut into the book and this other tale didn't? And the answer is there was so many tales you couldn't include them all, but everybody put in what they thought was important at the time.
Yeah, and with the cinema treatment to it, if they period, like with the Clive Owen movie, they have Hadrian's Wall and they have beings beyond Hadrian's Wall. Well, at the time of the Romans pulling back, there's no Hadrian's Wall. So those are the small details that it's like almost right, but not quite.
Well, and there's the Roman, is he a senator? I can't remember, who's got his vacation home north of Hadrian's Wall.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
If it's the land of the wild people, why is he in the land of the wild people? So it's an interesting take, and it's an interesting concept, and it's great cinema, right? You have to have a reason for these nights to go forth. So.
Yeah, and film-wise, I mean, we get burned by every film, and then they announce the next one, and we're like, well, maybe.
Well, maybe.
Right?
It's the holy grail of the cinema, right?
Disney's doing a live-action version of The Sword and the Stone, and maybe that will hew closer to the book than the animated one did. I know there's that Hellboy adaptation of The Wild Hunt, which was a story with many Arthurian elements that could be a great film, right? Do you guys have a favorite Arthurian media?
I was thinking about this, and believe it or not, I just found this seminal. I'm going to go back and read it. My father passed away. I just inherited his literature, John Steinbeck collection. When I was a kid, I read a book, a novella by John Steinbeck called Tortilla Flats. Just in the process of getting my stuff together, and maybe I'll get a chance to explain why I'm on this panel, because I'm not as knowledgeable as these people. I just found out that Tortilla Flats by John Steinbeck is a retelling, more or less, of one of the Arthurian tales. So I'm in like state to go home and read this thing now and double check it as a no longer 16-year-old kid. But that's one of my favorite things is the Pisano's story, I guess. And then, I don't really have a serious favorite. The Monty Python thing and, the Disney stuff. I saw the Clive Owen movie.
Yeah.
I liked it. I thought, it would have been a better movie if they had stripped out the Arthurian stuff kind of and that it seemed like they wrestled with it.
Yeah.
And I don't think I could figure out what was wrong. I'm getting a better sense of it now. Some stuff just did not rock for me. So I don't have a favorite. I suspect it's in this book.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
For me, I think probably my favorite media is the comic series Camelot 3000.
Yes.
And the reason why I liked that is because it took the entire Arthurian mythos, transported it 2,000 years, and proceeded to rip it apart and put it back together in a way I'd never seen before. And I'd already read about probably 2 or 3 dozen Arthurian-inspired books by that point, either directly Arthurian or using the form of Arthurian knights and leader and quests and what have you. So this was a completely different form for me. And just, transposing characters, let's change Tristan's gender to a woman and make her a lesbian. And let's turn the major warrior in the entire series into Guinevere. And Lancelot is not a knight; he is a millionaire industrialist and something of an asshole. And and all of these changes, and yet you still see the form of the Arthurian mythos underpinning the entire story in a way that you go, I know what's going to happen, and this is a fun ride. So that's probably my favorite.
Yeah. Awesome. Nobody mentioned the Fisher King movie. I don't know. I like that one.
The Fisher King was good with Robin Williams. That was a very good. I did like that one.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a great modern take on an old story.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the great things about the Arthurian canon is we can modernize it, we can shift it, we can shape it, and underpin it to a story, and people recognize the story and are comfortable with it, and then they're willing to go on the ride that you're taking them with the changes. And I think that's one of the strengths of the canon itself.
Yeah.
What else did you want to talk about?
Favorite books, favorite. Nobody mentioned a television series either.
No. Have a lot of you seen the television series, the BBC television series?
The BBC one?
The BBC one?
Was that the CBC co-production?
Oh,
Camelot?
the CBC. Yeah, the miniseries, or the series Merlin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Merlin. Yeah. Well, fair enough. I mean, they're always playing the game, expecting you to know certain things.
Yep.
Right. And they kind of expect you to know when they deviate. I mean, they were definitely making that up on the fly and stuff too, right?
Did anyone watch the Nick Cage Disney movie a few years ago? I'm forgetting the name of it right now, where he's really living in the 20th century.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I liked that one, but I liked it strictly as a story, because at that point you can let go of the mythos and not worry about them handling it.
Yeah, no, and I mean they've been around for so long. They're such well-known tales that you'll often get a sprinkling of Arthurian into sort of bolster up a fantasy story,
and that's one.
And I love that.
I'd be curious about talking about is I plundered it for my story, and it's pretty ripe for plunder to the point where it's becoming even more less. So the Legend of King Arthur gets a little solid all the time. People rob from it, and repurpose it. And where do you guys stand on that as people that would love this mythos?
Oh no, I love it when they do that. It's ripe for the plunder, and yeah, really like that. It's, you know, the old stories will always be there and not changed, and you can always look them up. But no, I love the new takes on it.
Is there any dangers in getting it wrong? I'm asking this for a reason. I'll tell you why. So I came into this as a fantasy writer, or I don't write a lot of fantasy, but I had a bunch of fantasy ideas. Call for submissions comes up. I'm assuming we're all writers and we're all wanting to sell stories. It's like, I have fantasy ideas that will fit into the Arthurian world. So I pitched my story. Good editors. I have a tendency to hit things sideways. Like I look for the most unobvious angle to hit it. Great editors, they occasionally go, oh, this is going a little too far. You need to rein this back a little bit. No, we can't have that in Camelot. They would never do that, and people will be upset if you do that sort of thing. And they had a good sense of allowing me to like tell my own story, which is more of a story of what's going on with the Catholic Church as much as anything else at that roughly that time in real history, and helped me figure out what I could steal, rob, and repurpose and make Arthurian, and at the same time tell my own original story.
Yeah.
You know? And is there an art to that, or is it just a gut feeling? No, this sucks.
There are certainly cases where people plunder the mythos and it doesn't work, right? You know, tend to go too far with some things, or you know, I was very upset. The Disney television program, what's that? Once Upon a Time or something?
Yes.
And they brought King Arthur in there, and they made him a villain. And I was like, oh no.
There's a lot of things you can do to Camelot and her knights and all those people. There's a lot of things you can do. But there are certain restrictions. You can't villainize Arthur.
Yeah.
You can't.
That's a dare, by the way.
You know, but the Arthurian mythos itself, from day one, has begged to be plundered and changed and retold. It has since its first beginnings. So I think by plundering it and reworking it and adding the new stuff in, we're carrying on the tradition of what Camelot is.
Yeah. The Descendants?
Was it the Waverly Place?
No.
But it's the same. Some of the same actors from that, and then the girl turns out to be King Arthur. So
Yeah.
King Arthur has been reincarnated. Have you seen the new one?
I haven't seen
So
it,
this is the idea that let's.
but my daughters have watched it.
The idea let's take King Arthur.
Yeah, and
Gender as well.
Yeah.
Well, and the gender flip's a pretty easy one, and very much in vogue. But there's, you know, I mean, and that's fine, and that can be a lot of fun, right? Yeah, no, like I said, and when we talk about adaptations that didn't work as well, they don't really hurt the original stories in any way. I mean, you know, stories build up a certain momentum so that no one project can sort of like, oh no, I don't like. You know, these stories aren't any good. They've lost their resonance for me because they're so universal. Like they'll stand up. I don't mind when people plunder the Arthurian thing and do it bad. I mean, I do mind it because I didn't really want to watch that, right? And it sucked me in, and I ended up watching it or reading it. But no, it's fine. You can't damage King Arthur, right? It's free to be played with, and has been forever. Like, I mean, Chrétien de Troyes, 1176 to 1181, he died without finishing.
He died without finishing it, yeah.
Lancelot. Yeah.
Like Steinbeck. Yeah.
And except for then there was a bunch of French writers who went, yay, we get to finish it now.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's a whole series of tales that pick up from where he left off and go in different directions all the time. Steinbeck's a fun one. That the acts of King Arthur and his noble knights, because Steinbeck seemed to be taking it. He died before he finished it, but he was trying to translate the Mallory very much into more modern English. Well, modern English, but sort of trying to keep the flavor. He was a big fan of Old English. Apparently, this story I read was that he wasn't very good at learning English and really struggled with it until he came across the Mallory and learned the Old English and really loved the tales, and it helped him learn modern English, right? And at the time he was writing those, it was after he'd won the Nobel Prize and everything. So, what's the library in New York? The Rockefeller one? So they let him come in and open up like a copy of Mallory from 1485 so that he could use it as the basis of his translation and stuff. It was very much a privileged thing, but he dug right into it.
Yeah, I do love that background. I somehow missed the fact that printed on the cover that it was unfinished.
Yes.
And he gets the last page. And
You're like,
but
I know there's more. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, he's picking and choosing because, that's what you have to do. There's just too much. There's too much material to include in a single book. Not that a lot of Arthurian writers ever write a single book.
No.
Right? Le Morte d'Arthur is. We buy it as one book, but it wasn't originally one book. And yeah, boy. I think it's inspired a lot of fantasy writers to do big series, right? Why write one novel when you can write 6,
God bless.
So, so favorite characters from the Arthurian? I have to confess, mine is Arthur. Merlin's fascinating. My favorite knight is Gawain, the Scottish knight. But right, Arthur's the one with the complexity for me, right?
Yeah, I have a holy trinity of favorites.
Mm-hmm.
I have who represents the past and how the underpinnings of it all. Arthur, who is the present of the Arthurian tales. And then there's Morgan Le Fay, who's the keeper of the future. She's the one that sees him into the mists, onto Avalon and whatnot. So for me, no one of them can exist without the other. So that's I have 3, but
Yeah, no, fair
they
enough.
have to work together here.
My favorite has a tendency to depend on who's writing them. But yeah, Morgan Le Fay is probably prime amongst them because in most of the Arthurian works that I've read, she's the only woman there who actually has agency and who really doesn't give a fuck if people don't like it. And I really appreciate those characters. Some of the other favorites I have are Kay and Bedivere, actually. Either because they're being loyal right-hand men to Arthur, or because they're being the cynical guy on the side saying, "Excuse me? You're doing what? Why? I have a suggestion." And I really like those kinds of characters too.
I'm going to say Merlin, for reasons that may seem a little weird, in that fantasy makes up probably 15% of what I consume. It's maybe a shocker to you, but voracious reader. And you probably are all in the same boat because only voracious readers are crazy enough to become writers, as a rule. A lot of what I like is noir stuff, crime noir. I like conflicted characters. I like characters with questionable motivations. I like characters that are kind of good in some situations and are complex and bad in others. And Merlin traditionally is presented quite often. If anyone's it's that guy, it's Merlin. He's the guy. He's working hard. He's on the side of good. Sometimes he's presented with questionable motivations. Sometimes he's almost an antagonistic character, just happens to be in the ploy. Arthur doesn't change much. Arthur has to be, the good guy, right?
Yeah.
Merlin, he's got one foot in the gray area sometimes. Sometimes the guy's got one foot on the street, depending on how he's depicted. So I always find him a more interesting character. Thing is, this is a worst place to exist. I'm not a big fan of magic. There's only a couple things that are regularly consumed that have magic in it. Conan being one thing that I cannot get enough of. But for some reason, this particular wizard, he's also a good archetype. Like, who's the archetypal wizard out there? Well, Merlin and I don't know who else. I can't think of anyone off the top of my head. And so I like him because he's the guy that can be the conflicted bad guy. He's the crime noir character in the Arthurian thing. So I tend to always be fascinated by him.
Oh yeah, he's done questionable things.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my dude usually. So
We have a question back.
Just kind of going off on what Renee mentioned about depending on who's writing it, because as you mentioned, there's a whole span of different variations of the stories and the characters. So are there characters that you love, ones that fit in a particular segment, or is there something about the evolution you've seen of a character? Like one that Renee mentioned was Sir Kay, who original Welsh tradition, probably a little bit closer to that Lancelot figure, and then just gets surlier and surlier as the legends continue.
Well, he was always considered a somewhat hot-tempered character, and depending on who's writing him, he can come out as basically a thug. There's at least one book out there, I haven't read it, and I've been trying to track it down, where he's basically a detective who's going through the court of Camelot trying to figure out a particular murder that has occurred. So you've got him acting as a Sherlock Holmes type. So, depending on who's writing the characters, they can be just about anything.
Yeah, Camelot, we know that he was practically more like a manipulator or a Loki.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he becomes the trickster archetype in that one. So, yeah, depending on who's writing them, it's more a case of what's the character type you like. Because, go there if you want this character to be that. Go over there if you want him to be that.
Yeah.
Don't give your villainous Arthur to this guy over here because he won't read it.
I'll read it.
We will all read
is
it.
it good?
Yeah.
We may comment after, but we'll all read it.
You don't remember the name of that book, do you?
Is
Is it that
Idols
one?
of
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
I was wondering. Right. Yeah, because I don't know. Whenever you're doing an adaptation, like with Kay, it's very much my take on Kay is that he's the Chamberlain of Camelot. So things that happen on Camelot, but he always wants to ride out and be more Lancelot, right? So yeah, no, that's a good one. That's a good title too. Idols of the Queen.
I didn't think it was that one. Okay, I'm going to have to double check. Okay. But, yeah.
Okay, because that's the one I know about, but I can't remember the author.
Yeah. People have done just about everything with the Arthurian mythos. So,
Right. Say that, but at the same time, I was amazed with Mists of Avalon, which came out in 1981, being the sort of first telling of the legend from a female perspective, right? That's a long time to go.
there have been somewhat more feminist tellings before then. Park Godwin came out with Fire Lord. And part female or male, I can never remember. Anyway, that particular author, the characterization of Morgan Le Fay in that one is that she is a Pictish queen, if you want to call it that, and she is a protector of a dying way of life. And really read Fire Lord because it's worth reading. It's another one of my favorite Arthurian books because it's a telling that adheres more closely than most to historical things. And it's got a very low fantasy element. There are pieces in it which may or may not be fantastic. They could be just simply people applying fantastic interpretations to events. Or maybe they truly are fantastic. It's a man?
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you read the sequel?
I believe I did, but it didn't impress me as much as Fire Lord did.
Well, I would say the same, but I thought it was definitely worthwhile because Guinevere is a refugee after the fall of Camelot.
Yeah. But the character that impressed me in Firelord was Morgana, because she's doing everything she can to keep the old way of life in Britain alive, and she is losing, and she knows it. And everything she does is, you can put that in parallel to modern Native Americans and look at it and go, this is what they're facing. And it's in many ways, it's a tragedy, but at the same time, it's a triumph. So, it's, yeah, read it.
It's interesting you talk about her, because we talk about plundering and reinventing, and I read a lot of comics as a kid. Morgan Le Fay is a DC supervillain.
Yeah.
And I had no idea for the longest time that had been extricated from the Arthurian legend and repurposed. Just another bad guy in Batman to a kid, right? So, pardon? Yeah, oh, that one too? So.
He is Arthurian.
My brother read Batman, and I was a Marvel kid, so my Batman knowledge is huge and still scant in this building.
Marvin.
Yeah. But it was the DC one I came across first too. So.
Yeah, that tragic heroism is very much a theme of the Arthurian legends.
Yeah.
Right.
Very much so.
It's dying of the light.
Yeah. Any other favorite themes from like when you think of our Arthurian tales, what sort of themes are you thinking about?
Well, the general stuff?
Yeah.
Well, there's obviously the Knights as Protectors thing.
Yeah.
Which, you know, have you ever seen the marginalia in illuminated manuscripts? They're wonderful because monks get bored. And there's a remarkable number of knights in the marginalia of illuminated manuscripts where they're fighting snails and rabbits in a variety of really... Rabbits are evil and imaginative in ways that really... Yeah. And if you can look at it as in the monks are subtly going to the knights, or you can look at it as the monks are really bored, and the biggest things that they have to fight are garden pests. So they bring in the knights in the marginalia of these illuminated manuscripts to fight the worst things that they have to fight. And if that isn't an emblem of the knight as a protector, I don't know what is.
I got nothing to really add to that, to be completely honest.
I think for me it's the human that are made through the Arthurian legends. You know, you have Arthur and Mordred that they're related, and yet it's to the death for both of them in this case. You have Morgan and Morgause and all of those other ones that there's family dynamics that underplay a lot of the action within. Even like with Galahad and Wayne, there's a family dynamic that underpins those stories as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the themes that draws me into.
Yeah. No, I don't know. And big fantasy themes of destiny and that sort of thing.
Destiny.
Only one person can pull the sword from the stone. Right.
Yeah.
And a certain thing of he will come again.
And he will come again.
Yes, the light may die, but it will flame up again.
Yes. In our time of greatest need, he will return. Right.
Camelot 3000.
Camelot 3000.
And that's one of
The aliens come, and Arthur comes back.
And that's one of the things that did all spark my interest as I dug a little more into history is in the early quests for power, you know, in the hundreds and, you know, going back before Roman time, rulers were not necessarily always all that altruistic. And with being so sarcastic here, 100% sarcastic really, I remember thinking it was one of the first stories set in those times where it was, you know, the king and the leader really had a vision, and you can look what's going on south of where right now. It really had a vision for a better world, right? And it was fighting the forces of darkness, surrounding himself with the right people, the Knights of the Round Table, to carve a better world. And it's one of the one of the early mythos where altruism and the good of humanity becomes a thing for a leader. And there's other stories from that time like that, but this one's grown the magnitude that it has now. This is one of the first exposures I had to that of someone back then. It was usually somebody, if they were altruistic, it was because they were protecting their own kingdom from the evils of another kingdom. You learn a little bit of history and you find out everybody is the good guy and everybody is the bad guy, depending on what side of a border you stand on. And the Arthurian legend was one of the first things that's kind of superseded that, where it's this guy stands for the good of all people, and you still don't see a lot of that,
It feels like it's the reason the story survived. Man, wouldn't that be nice?
Well, it's
Well,
just
yeah,
so
very
bloody
much so,
unlikely.
right?
It's just such a damn unlikely thing, you don't see it today. I don't want to get all political. Look at Donald Trump, right? America first. King Arthur is not a Britain first guy, right?
No.
They talk about England and all that kind of stuff. He's not England first. He's to me a people first guy.
Well,
He's a
yeah,
people
no.
first, and
You
the
know.
round table was round for a reason. His
Right.
were multinational,
Yeah.
interracial for a reason. He portrayed, and maybe that's one of the underpinnings of why he's still popular today.
Mhm.
Is he holds that hope of things can be better. We can have a better world. We are all equals. And I think that's one of the enduring parts of his myths.
Yeah, no.
Maybe that's the biggest fantasy element of all, is a world
That's-
leader actually aspiring to that. As sad as it is to say.
Fight for right.
Might.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
Yes.
The early
Yeah.
superheroes.
What you got there.
Arthur is the superhero of medieval literature.
getting back to the subject of shameless
yeah.
plundering,
Yeah, shameless plundering.
The other superpowered guys, because
Yeah.
they're not serfs, they're not the lowest of the low. These
No.
are the guys that have got the armor, the money, the weapons, the whatever. They're the ones he's putting together into a team to create his own vision for the land.
And those early
There's
comic
something
guys.
extremely fascist about it,
But actually,
but for all the right
in
reasons.
some ways, Arthur himself is a rags to riches because he's the original farm boy who is the chosen one, literally.
Sort of, but he also comes from
He may
blood.
have come from
But he
noble
didn't know
blood,
that.
But he didn't know
doesn't
that.
but until he pulls the sword from the stone, he thinks that he's random Joe, pig spiller.
yeah, no, and that his highest ambition is to be a squire to his foster brother, right?
Yeah. So, it's rags to riches. Cinderella with swords.
And a tragic end.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a tragic end.
Yeah. Oh, how are we doing for time?
How are we doing for time?
Oh no, we got 10 more minutes.
We have 10 minutes. Should we open it up to questions?
Sure.
I was going to mention one of my favorite weird takes on the Arthurian myth. And again, maybe it's not that weird now, but it was. I mean, I had read the classic comics Knights of the Round Table, and I had read Camelot, and probably some other thing. And then I read Richard Monaco's Parsifal,
yeah.
which Parsifal's a complete innocent who doesn't even know what to do with the naked woman, and somehow he gets dragged into this war. And I think in the third book, his son is going around with a piece of the Holy Grail lodged in his head because it heals with its touch, but it still like blood.
But it's still stuck there. Yeah.
It's stuck in.
So it is bizarre. The battle scenes are like they feel like I don't know, Vietnam era, just sort of like blood and mud. And nobody knows what's going on and sheer chaos.
Well,
It
Parsifal,
is just bizarre.
yeah, Parsifal is all the German version of Arthur and his knights because the Germans wanted their slice. The French got Lancelot, the Germans got Parsifal.
But I think at least in the first three books, all you saw of like Arthur and Merlin and such was that they were like they were very political. They were very kind of scheming, manipulating, and they were not the protagonist in any way.
Don't
Yeah.
read that villainous.
Villainous.
I'll read what I want to read.
Is there anybody else that has a question or a comment?
Or
About plundering.
yes.
Talk about plundering a mythos. How do you plunder a mythos that has no actual concrete text?
Oh,
I just like grandiose adjectives and verbs. But plunder might be wrong. Yeah.
It's not just that, but I mean, there is, you talk about a canon, there is no canon.
No.
Not really,
There
no.
is no standard text.
And that was
No.
the shocker for me.
These are all based on folklore anyway, oral tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So every person who's told that tale up until the point that it's recorded is actually embellished it and built on it.
Yes.
So nobody's plundering or writing wrong stories
Well, it depends
if you're
on.
all adding to this giant sort of collective, ever-expanding jigsaw.
Well, it can depend a bit because it's things like Mordred. You know, he's supposed to be the child by incest of Arthur. No, in the original Mabinogion, well, as original yet, he's just Guinevere and Arthur's son. So, you know,
And in other tellings, he's a nephew.
yeah.
So,
And because of the French thing, Guinevere and Lancelot, there's this illicit love affair. Welsh usage is you don't call your daughters Guinevere because she's a slut. So, you know.
And that's it's funny you mention that. In the process of writing the story, you may have been able to tell that I know some things about Arthurian legend, but I'm kind of out of my depth compared to these people on the right. I came into this as a fiction writer. I thought I understood the Arthurian legend, and I thought it was a guy who, just like a lot of famous historical figures, has had layers of bullshit added to him by fiction over the years, right? As I started researching the story I wrote for By the Light of Camelot, the rug came out for me, and I felt like I was falling into a void for a while. Where the hell do I start? Because everyone's arguing about what is real. I finally just started making up my own stuff and trusting people who eat, sleep, and breathe it to steer me right. You can't really steal from something that doesn't exist. At the same time, you can still get it wrong.
Yeah.
That's something I wrestled with a lot as a writer.
there are certain benchmarks that have to be adhered to within it. If you want to talk about a decisive work within the Arthurian stories, we'll just call them stories and not a canon, most people will defer to Mallory, right? That seems to be the reference point. That seems to be the touchstone. It seems to be the book nobody can ever really get through. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it took you, what, a year to read it?
Yep.
Yeah.
I had to read books in between. Right?
You know,
'Cause
so, yeah, you had to read books in between because Mallory tried to stick everything in there to record it.
yeah.
So because of that one touchstone, I think we're just open to, I guess maybe plunders, maybe a bigger word.
It feels like plundering when you're taking a character or an aspect of the character and popping it in your own thing. You feel like you're, digging out a jewel, popping it over there. But it's perfectly allowed for every writer.
Every writer.
Your wife,
Yeah.
whoever else is translating or reimagining it. But that's what we're talking about. Every time a different author picks it up, they're reimagining this piece of collective mythos
Yes.
that, again, is nonsense. But we reference Mallory because of early English translations, and as a 21st century individual, you've only got so much to work with, right? That's available to you in English, so you accept it as a standardized form, and anything else is
Mhm.
deviation. But that's something we ascribe to Mallory rather than a role we actually have.
Well, yeah. Yeah, very much so.
Let's ask the editors of this book here. So this is basically original Arthurian tales.
Right.
How did you apply criteria? I know a little bit firsthand. How did you apply criteria to people bringing in stuff that was completely new and 100% original, and determining what fit and what didn't work?
Yeah. Well, you're using as your guideline sort of the themes of the Arthurian canon, right?
Yeah.
And going that way.
The themes we wanted, the themes that we prescribed to it.
We had
Knights
to-
had to be good.
Yeah.
Knights
You know.
Yeah, I brought in a lot of bad people that didn't make it into the final story. It'll be bad, but I'll wait.
And, we had to push more to get people to be more original. We had a lot of people who really wanted to retell a story,
Yes.
right? From a familiar point of view and stuff, too. And we're just like,
Collaboration.
no, we're recognizing this. No. Right? We're looking for original tales. So
We're looking for
that was
original
sort of more
tales.
the challenge than getting them to include the Arthurian. Hey, nobody seemed to pick up on.
Does anyone here have this book yet? Okay. I'm going to count these guys out. Has anyone read this? So I picked this up at the free library. Any of you read this? First person that brings me a copy of that, I will give you this, which is a highly respected. I just stumbled on it the other day, but apparently it's number 3 in the series.
It is 3 in the series.
Yeah.
Yes, the Winter King is the first one.
So, RG overall, I'm around. I will hunt you down in a very friendly, non-aggressive way. Show me a copy of that, and I will give you this book. And these people love it. So. I was going to count the guys that are in the publishing world out, but what do you think? Is he admissible?
He's admissible. He's admissible.
I saw this before any.
Dude, it's yours.
Absolutely did.
Yeah.
It's yours. So, all right.
He is a diehard fan because he saw it before we did.
Yeah.
Do I want the book? No.
Yeah.
Somebody else.
Okay, here's my request. Put it in a little free library when you're done. I'm big on the little free libraries. I read books, I just put them in there.
Or carry it around until one of these guys.
Yeah, bring me a book, first person, yeah.
Yep.
If he won't take it, first person that shows me that, I'll give you this.
There are,
Anybody have any other questions or recommendations to make?
yes.
Yes,
Constantine, you
I
are
just finished
eligible,
that
by the
one.
way. You are you do fit the circle of eligibility, by the way. I'll take
Yes.
your word on it.
Yeah.
I just finished that one and
The Hollow Hills.
really liked it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's also the Mary Stewart series, The Hollow Vales and Crystal Caves. Those ones.
Yeah. Those ones.
They're a good touchstone as well. Not as much as Sordid Sunset, but there's a lot of aspects. And another really great one, I will recommend it if you can track it down, is by Gillian Bradshaw, and it is the Hawk of May series.
Oh yeah.
If you haven't read it, I strongly recommend it.
Oh yeah.
Jack White, he has a soft spot in my heart. I love his Arthurian work, and I attended a workshop by him a few years ago here, and he said the whole premise of that story was, what if pulling the sword from the stone was a magic trick with levers and pressure points, and that's what started that series for him. And I thought, oh, cool. So talk about bending the genre,
Yeah.
or reinventing the whole genre. So Jack White is another really great series. You know, there's quite a few, but yeah, Jack is my heart. So
Kind of a Lyre of Orpheus by Robertson Davies.
Yeah.
And the subplot is trying to write a non-opera about King Arthur. And, also features a sort of Arthur with a beer Lancelot love triangle among the people who are in charge.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And yes, they can lament just how awful all of the adaptations of King Arthur can be.
Janice.
Yeah.
This boy is about maybe 14, 15 years old, and he's so traumatized by the loss of his mother that he escapes into the Arthur legend and gets completely consumed, like he loses himself in it. Like he sees himself as a reincarnation of Arthur. And this girl he becomes infatuated with is Guinevere, and he completely loses himself in the story. And it's just beautiful because it kind of introduces 9 to 12-year-olds to this legend in a way that's accessible to them.
Yeah.
I loved it. I think so.
There's a Stephen Lougheed series, his
Yes.
Pendragon series by Stephen Lougheed. Yeah, that one has a little bit more of a religious bent to it and an undertone to it. So if that's not your thing, I wouldn't recommend it. But they are well written and well done. And I think that kind of wraps up our time. Was there any last quick questions? Comments? I see Keith on.
Yeah.
He's pondering.
He's pondering.
Guys, we want the history guy with degrees in history to ask us any questions. I don't know.
You can make a comment.
Yeah.
Tell us how
No,
wrong we are.
I think he's just taking it all in.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much for coming and listening to us rant and rave and discuss our favorites.
It is fun to rant in front of other people. for a
It is
change,
fun
yes.
to rant in front of other people that is not my family that go, Mom, I've heard this before. So I hope you all have
Are you on that again?
Are you on that
Yeah.
again?
And for you Arthurian fans, clearly people here are steeped in this stuff. I think we'd all love to know, if you get your hands on these stories, what you think of the stories.
Would
I would
love
love
to
to know.
hear.
I would love to hear what's wrong, what's right, what came in
What
at the
you
right
loved,
angle,
what you
wrong.
didn't.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more of what you loved, but I have probably more to gain from what you think is wrong.
Fair enough.
Thank you
Well,
so much.
thank you very much.